Canadian ports will have to play a big role in making that goal a reality.
We want to continue to make investments in those assets because in some way, shape, or form, we think that'll untap even more economic activity.
Halifax has just changed the balance of power in North American shipping, and it didn't take years of debate, endless committees, or trillion-dollar spending bills. It took 3 weeks, a clear decision, and a $25 million investment. While U.S. ports remain trapped in regulatory paralysis, Canada has moved decisively, positioning Halifax as the most advanced green shipping gateway on the continent. Before we go deeper into how this shift is unfolding and why it matters globally, support this report by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. It helps ensure you don't miss the stories that are quietly reshaping trade, power, and economic influence. What Canada has built in Halifax is not symbolic. It is operational, strategic, and timed perfectly to exploit a growing vulnerability in the American port system. The investment funds the first hydrogen refueling port in North America, alongside supporting infrastructure for alternative fuels, electric rail transport, and zero-emission cargo handling. While American ports are still commissioning feasibility studies and environmental reviews, construction in Halifax is already underway. This is not a future promise. It is a physical build. A hydrogen production facility powered by Nova Scotia's hydroelectric capacity. On-site storage and bunkering systems designed for hydrogen, ammonia, and other alternative fuels. Electric rail locomotives connecting the port directly to the continental rail network. Every piece is designed to meet one unavoidable reality. European shipping emissions regulations are no longer optional. Beginning in 2026, European Union carbon reporting rules require shipping companies to document and reduce emissions across their entire logistics chain. This includes transatlantic routes. That regulation forces a decision on shipping companies moving goods between Europe and North America. Either continue routing through U.S. ports using diesel-dependent infrastructure and absorb escalating carbon penalties, or reroute through ports that can support carbon-neutral operations. Halifax is building for that decision now. American ports are not. The Halifax to Hamburg Green shipping corridor is the centerpiece of this strategy. Hamburg is Germany's primary gateway for transatlantic trade and one of Europe's most important industrial ports. Automotive components, machinery, chemicals, and advanced manufacturing exports flow through Hamburg toward North American markets. Under EU rules, those shipments increasingly require low-emission or zero-emission pathways. Halifax provides that pathway. Hydrogen-powered and alternative fuel vessels can refuel directly at the port. Cargo can move inland using electric rail rather than diesel locomotives. For the first time, European exporters can plausibly claim near-zero emission delivery from Germany to central Canada and even the American Midwest. That matters because emissions compliance is becoming a cost variable that grows every year. What looks like a marginal advantage in 2026 becomes a decisive one by 2028. Halifax is positioning itself on the right side of that curve. By contrast, the major U.S. East Coast ports remain structurally unprepared. New York and New Jersey handle the largest container volumes on the coast, yet have no hydrogen refueling capacity, no alternative fuel bunkering infrastructure under construction, and no binding timelines to deploy it. Virginia, Savannah, Charleston, and Boston face the same limitation. Sustainability language exists in press releases, but physical infrastructure does not. The reason is not technical ignorance. It is institutional drag. American maritime regulations were written for diesel shipping. Introducing hydrogen requires overlapping federal, state, and municipal approvals, extended environmental impact assessments, and safety certifications across multiple agencies. Each step can take years. Halifax moved forward because Canadian regulations already accommodate alternative fuels, and the Port Authority operates with centralized control and provincial backing. The result is a first-mover advantage that cannot be easily reversed. Halifax is on track to have operational hydrogen refueling by late 2026 or early 2027. Even if American ports began serious construction today, they would not reach comparable readiness until the end of the decade. That gap is long enough to permanently shift shipping behavior. shipping routes are sticky. Once logistics networks adjust, rail schedules align, and inland distribution centers are optimized around a specific port, companies do not switch back easily. Halifax does not need to replace U.S. ports entirely. It only needs to capture the fastest-growing segment of transatlantic trade, emissions-compliant shipping. The $25 million investment extends beyond the docks. Electric rail is a critical component. Halifax's geographic disadvantage has always been distance. Toronto is over 1,500 kilometers away. Chicago is even farther. But Canadian National Railway connects Halifax to the entire North American rail grid. Electrifying that connection transforms a weakness into an advantage. European companies can now route cargo through Halifax, move it inland via electric rail, and claim carbon-neutral delivery to major markets. U.S. ports cannot offer that. Their rail networks remain diesel-dependent. For companies facing mandatory carbon reporting, that difference translates directly into compliance costs. This is where American port dominance begins to fracture. For decades, U.S. ports benefited from scale, infrastructure depth, and entrenched trade relationships. But those advantages assume a stable regulatory and political environment. That assumption no longer holds. Trump's tariff threats and trade unpredictability have accelerated the shift. European shippers do not plan supply chains around political volatility. They seek reliability. Halifax offers a stable regulatory framework, predictable trade policy, and infrastructure aligned with European environmental mandates. That combination is increasingly rare. Canadian policymakers understand this. Halifax is not an isolated project. It is part of a broader strategy to reduce dependence on U.S. infrastructure. Energy exports redirected through Vancouver. Power transmission projects aimed at European markets. Arctic shipping routes under development. Halifax becomes the Atlantic anchor of this diversification effort. The scale comparison is stark. U.S. East Coast ports move tens of millions of containers annually. Canadian ports handle far less volume today. But growth trajectories matter more than absolute numbers. Vancouver has already demonstrated how quickly cargo can shift when shippers seek alternatives to U.S. congestion, labor disputes, and regulatory uncertainty. Halifax is positioned to replicate that dynamic with Europe. The hydrogen infrastructure amplifies this effect. Every European shipping company facing emissions compliance has a financial incentive to test Halifax routes. Every company worried about tariff disruptions has an incentive to bypass U.S. ports entirely. Once those routes prove reliable, they become permanent. American ports face deeper structural disadvantages. Regulatory complexity slows innovation. Political fragmentation makes coordinated investment difficult. Competing priorities push green infrastructure down the list. Aging facilities demand constant maintenance. Labor resistance to automation increases costs and delays modernization. Halifax avoided these traps. The Port Authority controls development. Provincial and federal governments aligned quickly. Automation and electric systems reduce operating costs and labor intensity. The result is a port designed for the next shipping era, not the last one. European shipping companies are already responding. Major carriers investing in hydrogen, ammonia, and green methanol vessels need ports capable of supporting those fuels. Halifax is building that capability. U.S. ports are not. Route planning reflects that reality. Timing is everything. EU emissions. Reporting becomes mandatory in 2026. Halifax aligns perfectly with that deadline. U.S. ports miss it by years. A 3 to 4 year window is enough to lock in new trade corridors, reshape inland logistics, and reallocate investment toward Canadian entry points. Once warehouses, rail hubs, and customs workflows are built around Halifax, reversing the flow becomes costly and inefficient. This is not a temporary diversion. It is structural realignment. The employment consequences are real. American ports support vast ecosystems of jobs. As cargo volumes shift incrementally, those jobs erode. Halifax's automated electric systems require fewer workers per container, reinforcing the cost advantage. What American unions resisted for decades now becomes a competitive liability. This is why the $25 million figure is misleading. It is not the size of the investment that matters. It is the leverage it creates. By acting early, Canada captured an outsized strategic advantage at minimal cost. Trump's trade posture unintentionally reinforced the shift. Uncertainty pushed shippers to look for alternatives. Halifax offered one that aligned with both political stability and environmental compliance. The result is a self-reinforcing migration away from U.S. port dependence. American maritime policy failed to anticipate how rapidly environmental regulation would translate into hard commercial pressure. Green shipping was treated as a long-term aspiration rather than an immediate competitive requirement. That miscalculation created a timing gap, and in global logistics, timing is decisive. Halifax is positioning itself as North America's primary green shipping gateway at the exact moment global regulations make that role unavoidable. European emissions rules are transforming sustainability from a voluntary goal into a binding operational requirement. Ports that cannot support low or zero emission shipping will increasingly be sidelined, regardless of their historical importance. Halifax meets those requirements now, not in theory, but in concrete infrastructure. As this transition accelerates, the implications extend far beyond one port. They signal a broader erosion of U.S. logistical dominance, driven not by decline alone, but by hesitation. Canada did not outspend the United States. It out-executed it. And that execution is already reshaping transatlantic trade flows. If you value clear, fact-based analysis of how infrastructure decisions quietly reshape global power, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. More reports like this are coming, and the next shifts may already be underway.